Okay,
I
so
would.
let me begin with a story, okay? I'll begin with a story. This is one of my favorite stories that I like to share. This story took place in Netanya around 20 years ago or so. Okay, 20, 21 years ago, something like that. And my grandfather, well, we suppose it was the beginning, first indicators of his dementia. My Zaidi Mendy, his name is Menachem Mendel. He passed away a number of years ago, Alav Shalom. And unfortunately, sadly, for the last 10 or whatever years of his life, he suffered from pretty significant Alzheimer's and dementia. This Shabbos may have been the first sign of it for us, for the grandchildren. I went together with my cousins, Adam and Tara Klein, who now live in Dallas, Texas. And my grandparents were wonderful Machnisi Oreach. They had over people from the shul there, the McDonald Street Shul. A very funny name for a shul, McDonald's. They had people there, many all the time, really. Anglo-Saxon, South African, British, Australian, some American, people who had made Aliyah, who were, I would call them probably traditional. As far as I know, they kept Shabbos. I didn't really know them personally. They certainly belonged to an Anglo-Saxon, Dati Le'umi, national religious sort of a shul. And what happened was my grandfather set the Shabbos clock, and he did so apparently incorrectly, because instead of the lights going on for the meal and the guests, the lights went off for the meal and the guests. And there was an issue because it really was too dark to eat in the room there. So the question was, could we find a non-Jew where they lived on Rehov Ha'amonim, I think it was called, right near the Seasons Hotel, the King George Hotel, a bunch of hotels right there along the beach. And and so it's not too hard to find an Arab or somebody who wasn't Jewish there. And the question was, can we find a non-Jew to turn the lights on for us on Shabbos? Okay? That was the question. Well, the people there decided to take a vote. And they decided to take a vote. The two sides of the question were permissible or prohibited. Are you allowed to go ask a non-Jew to turn this? Or are you not allowed to? Would you believe me if I told you that unanimously they voted that it was permitted?
Permitted, yes.
Would you believe that?
Yes.
And even as a young yeshiva bacher, I was probably, 20, 21, whatever it was. Even as a young yeshiva bacher, I knew that this is not how it works. If Judaism is a democracy, if you will, if halachic, I wouldn't even say halachic process, but if you're deciding what to do within the framework of Judaism is a democracy, then they have a vote, because why not? I'll tell you, and we don't get political here at the Kehillah, of course, but I'll tell you that I have a few observations about this election. One of them is that the fact that a young man, 21 years old, could come from Argentina yesterday, or maybe on Monday. He happens to be an American citizen because his mother was born in America, and they were smart. They got their children registered as Americans, like all the Israelis do. Okay, all the American Israelis. So he has as much a right to vote as, let's say, Barry Steiner. True or false? It's true. Of course, it's true.
It's good.
Now, if you think about it, it's ludicrous. Barry Steiner has written tomes, has written academic works, scholarly works on American politics. He understands all the various aspects of the American political system and its machinations, everything from healthcare to taxation, et cetera, et cetera. And the guy from Argentina, who might be the biggest tzaddik in the world, but doesn't know anything about anything. And his vote counts just as much. So I don't know if that bothers you. It kind of bothers me that is true, okay? And I'll tell you that I don't have a better system to suggest, okay? I don't have a better system to suggest, but it just seems so strange to me that you don't really have to know anything about anything and you can vote yes or no. Somebody was telling me that on the propositions, they should have 3 options: yes, no, or tell me more about this, educate me so I can make an informed decision. But it's not our reality. It's not our reality. But what about in terms of halacha? You have to be knowledgeable to have a vote. When it comes to halacha, you have to be knowledgeable to have a vote. The point of my story of my grandparents and their friends is these people certainly believed that halacha was a democracy, and that you don't need to have you don't have to have any knowledge at all, okay, to have a vote. To the best of my knowledge, this group of people, you know, I don't want to say anything, but you know, in terms of studying Shulchan Aruch in depth, amount of time spending, you know, studying Shulchan Aruch in depth, I would say, I don't know, you know, who am I to judge? But I didn't get the sense that they, put it this way, they didn't quote anybody in determining their choice. There's, you know, Reb David Feinstein, Alav Shalom, was just nifter. Moshe's father, Moshe Feinstein, we've all heard of him as the preeminent posek, decider of halachic practice for Torah Jewry in the United States of America and really throughout the world, from the time that he came here to the States until he passed away. I would say probably around almost 60 years or something like that. He made a decision about something that went against a particular opinion. The Pri Megadim is one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, and there was a Pri Megadim that Rav Moshe was arguing with, and I don't know what the issue was. It's not really material to this discussion. And somebody had a problem with Rav Moshe's psak, with the decision that he had made, and he went over to Rav Moshe and he said to him, "How could the Rosh Yeshiva have said that something is mutter? What about the Pri Megadim?" Okay, and the guy became insistent. He started badgering him. He became like borderline abusive. Well, finally, they kicked him out. And when he left, he turned to his sons and he says, "This guy thinks I don't know the Pri Megadim. I learned it 400 times. I studied the Pri Megadim, the commentary of the Pri Megadim on this particular section of Shulchan Aruch." Somebody who's making halachic decisions has to be an informed decision. I myself run far away from making halachic decisions on my own. Yes, of course, I can open up a Mishnah Berurah or any sefer and tell you what they say. And certainly, if a question comes up and it's mefurish, which means it's explicit, it's black and white, it's clear what the halacha is, because you have, let's say, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Shnei Zalman of Liadi's Shulchan Aruch, or you have Rabbi Yosef Kar's Shulchan Aruch and Rav Moshe Yisrael's Shulchan Aruch. Of course, I can read those texts, and we can rely on them, certainly in a pinch, okay? But if somebody were to ask me a question, I'll give you an example, okay? Somebody asked me a question today. A woman texted me. She has acrylic nails. I wasn't really sure what they were. No, I'm just kidding. I had to look them up. She has acrylic nails. And one nail's a little bit chipped, and then they'd grown out a little bit so that they weren't all the way to the cuticle because they're already a month old. And she asked me if she can go to the mikveh with the nails done like that. What kind of a question is that? Why should she not be allowed to go to the mikveh wearing those nails?
You're not supposed to have nail polish on when you go to the mikveh.
It's a chatzitza. It interrupts between the water and the nail. Now, this particular woman is a woman I know who doesn't have a history of going to the mikveh on a regular basis, shall we say? Okay, and here she is. She's calling me up and saying, "I want to go to the mikveh, but I've got this question, and can I go to the mikveh with this being the situation?" So there's different options. She can get them fixed. She can get them corrected. She can fill in all the blank space. She can have it done in such a way that it's brand new. Maybe there's leniencies, whatever. I'm not making that decision on my own. Even if I could find someone who says it black and white, I'm not making those decisions on my own. Even though I actually know Hilchos Nida really well, but I just don't consider myself enough of an informed person in order to make a psak like that, that has major repercussions. Because if she goes to the mikveh and it doesn't count, well then, when she's together with her husband, it's a chiyuv kares. It's pretty significant sin. So certainly not my place. So I reached out to somebody else, to Rabbi Avi Leibowitz, who has much broader shoulders than I have, and I discussed it with him, and I gave her the psak that I gave her. Having an informed opinion is critical when it comes to halacha. That being said, the concept and the notion of the majority actually making a difference when it comes to halacha is certainly true in a couple of different ways. I'll share my screen with you in a moment to show you some sources. It's fascinating, and I don't know enough about governance, certainly in this country, that 50.01% of the vote is enough to win a majority, isn't it? As far as I know. Is that true or false? I mean, I'm not sure if the way it works with the Electoral College, if that number is even possible. What's the minimum percentage of votes possible if the Electoral College is split evenly? Do you know?
No.
Did you know that there's an even amount of electoral votes? Is that true?
What's that?
That there's an even amount of electoral votes?
No, it's uneven.
It's uneven. It has to be uneven, right? But is it
You need-
possible?
Yes, it has to be.
Say that again?
Yes, it has to be. Somebody.
Yeah. I mean, you would think, even though, okay, whatever. You would think that it has to be that way. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, right? Okay. So let's take a look at a pasuk. Let me share my screen with you. So this is a pasuk in Shemos Chav Gimel Beis, Exodus 23:2. The context is, I believe, Parshas Mishpatim, which discusses laws of. Let's see if I can blow it up for you a little bit. The context is the responsibilities that judges have with regard to judging. Obviously, they're not allowed to take bribes. They're not allowed to hear testimony if the plaintiff, defendant, the other person is not there present at the same time. Okay. That's the context. And certainly in the simple reading of the pasuk, you don't necessarily see anything about our question. But as we'll see in a moment, it actually has a lot of relevance. Losia achre rabim leros. You shall neither side with the mighty leros to do wrong. Rabim, in this case, he's translating here as the mighty. Velosane ariv lintos. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute. As to pervert it, achre rabim lahatos, in favor of the mighty. Okay, again, the simple explanation, the simple understanding of this pasuk is, actually, I'm curious to see, because the translation is not so literal. Let's take a look at a different translation from Chabad.org. They have, Chabad.org is one of the most incredible websites you can ever encounter. It's really a bracha for Klal Yisrael, and I mean that, with everything. So what are we looking at? 23:12. Yeah. If we look at Exodus 23:12. As soon as my internet cooperates over here. Let's take a look here. Hold on.
It was 2, not 12, I think.
Thank you. Here we go. Okay, thanks. You shall not follow the majority for evil, and you shall not respond concerning a lawsuit to follow many to pervert justice. All right, let's start with the first pasuk. You shall not accept a false report. Obviously, the court has a responsibility not to accept anybody who's lying. Do not place your hand with a wicked person to be a false witness, meaning don't join a wicked person and if he's trying to talk you into bearing false witness. You shall not follow the majority for evil. Maybe he's talking about peer pressure. Let's just some simple understanding. Maybe there's some sort of peer pressure, societal pressure, okay? And they're the majority. You have to ignore them. You shall not respond concerning a lawsuit to follow many to pervert justice. Again, there's some sort of pressure to pervert justice. Okay, let's look at Rashi though. It's going to be a very different reading of the pasuk. Oh, it's a little bit of a long Rashi. So the Rashi here will help us understand just a simple pshat, okay? If the litigant asks you about the corrupted judgment, do not answer him concerning the lawsuit with an answer that follows those many to pervert the judgment from its true ruling, but rather tell the judgment as it is and let the neck iron hang on the neck of the many, meaning let the many bear the punishment for the perversion of justice. Okay. This is, again, just a simple understanding of the pasuk. We're trying to preserve the truth. Okay. Let's take a look at the earlier Rashi. It's a little bit long. I'm not going to look at all of it. There are halachic interpretations for this verse given by the sages of Israel, but the language of the verse does not fit its context according to them. From here, they, the sages, expounded that we may not decide unfavorably for the defendant by a majority created by one judge. They interpreted the end of the verse, Achirabim lahatos, after the majority to decide, to mean that if those judges voting that the defendant is guilty outnumber those voting that the defendant is innocent by 2, the verdict is to be decided unfavorably according to their majority's opinion. Okay, that's very, very, very interesting, isn't it? You need to have a majority of 2. The text speaks of capital cases in regard to the death penalty. Note that in monetary cases, the court requires a majority of only one judge in order to convict someone. Okay, so what Rashi is saying is that it depends on the case that we're talking about. One, if the case is a case that's a capital case, you've got to have a majority of 2. And if the case is a monetary case, it's enough to have a majority of 1. We'll soon see that how many judges is required. How many judges are in a basin? Do you know the answer to that question?
3, no?
The answer is it depends on the type of case. A simple monetary case is 3. Many, many cases are 3. But a capital case is, I believe, is 23.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe it's 23. So it all depends on the case. But either way, a majority will rule depending on what kind of level of majority. That's a majority of more than 1, or a majority of 1 is considered to be enough. Okay. How many judges are on the Supreme Court?
9.
Why?
Ask the Democrats.
But why not? I mean, that's why. Obviously,
It's changed over the years.
okay. Was it always an odd number?
Yes.
Because it has to be. Obviously, right? Because what happens if they can't agree?
The lower decision is the decision.
Pardon me?
Lower decision holds before the Supreme Court.
Decision becomes operative. In other words, it's affirmed.
I'm confused. How could they, if there's an odd amount of people, how could they have a disagreement that's equal?
Because the rule is that if there are only 8, here's how the case gets there. You have a trial court, you have a court of appeal that has done something, somebody's appealed or sought writ of certiorari to go to the Supreme Court. When they get to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court can't decide and even vote, then the appellate court is automatically affirmed.
Got it. Now, that means that one of the judges abstained. Otherwise, how, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or the judge has passed away and they haven't confirmed a new one yet.
Right. Okay. Mr. Smith, did you ever argue a case in the Supreme Court?
One case.
Okay. I didn't know. Okay, I'll have to ask you what that was some other time. Were you nervous?
I did the briefing, and we retained the Solicitor General, former Solicitor General, to do the actual argument.
Okay. Yeah, there are many, in a much lower case, but there are many attorneys nowadays who are not comfortable going to court, so they'll do all the work, and then they'll hire someone to be the court person.
In the Supreme Court, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
When we got, if you don't mind my interrupting, when we got to the court, our lawyer was Rex Lee. This was his 60th case in the Supreme Court. And when the court opens, they start by saying, you're going to have to meet with the clerk of the court to get the rules. And then he said, and the clerk said, now I'm going to tell you the rules, but Mr. Lee could do it far better than I could.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. It sounds like your firm went about that in a very strategic way. Okay. So there's a sefer called Torah Tamima. Torah Tamima, thank you, is, his name is slipping my mind right now, but it's a marvelous sefer, because what it is it's on Chumash, it's also on the Megillos, and what he does is, he tells you where Chazal speak about the pasuk. So as you go through the Chumash, and you want to know what is the Gemara, what is the Tosefta, what is the Mishnah, what is the Breita, are there any oral Torah teachings rooted in these verses? He'll tell you what they are. Now, he does a very kind of brief sort of job. There's a sefer called Torah Shlema, which is, I believe, written by a Lubavitcher Chassid, if I'm not mistaken, which is the same concept but on steroids. Like every pasuk has, I mean, it's unbelievable. There's like 45. I don't know. There's many volumes, and each volume is thick like this, and it's just on the Chumash. It's just incredible. So the Torah Tamima is choosing the Mamari Chazal, the various Gemaras that are kind of more well known, I guess. He's not teaching every medrash or anything like that. So here he tells us that, and this is a Gemara, I believe, in Sanhedrin, Hosif HaKasev Od Echad, that somehow or another Chazal saw in here that you should not have an even Beis Din, Mikan She'in Beis Din Shakal. You should not have a Beis Din, a court that has an even amount of, I guess, judges. Why? Here's Torah Tamima's comments. She'in Lasos Beis Din Zugi. Zugi means in pairs. Zug is a pair. So he says you can't have a Beis Din that comes in pairs. Why? She'im Yischalku B'Deoseim, because if they're going to argue, Yushkulim Zeh Keneged Zeh. So you're going to have two hold this way, two hold that way. V'lo Yuchar Hadin, and the judgment won't be decided. Ma she'en kein b'mispar she'eno Zugi. Obviously, if you have an odd number, there's no such thing really as abstaining, and therefore one of the judge, they're obviously going to have two on one side, one on the other. Three on one side, two on the other. And so far we haven't really said anything. That's a great chiddush, right? But let's look at the pasuk. This is actually, if you're a careful reading of the verse, actually yields this kind of a reading. Because what does it say? Lintot. What is it? What is nitiyah? Is to lean. Lintot lintos acha. You lean, you go after the majority. You lean towards, you recline towards the majority. Because again, you have, let's say, a minority and a majority. This is a very, very similar teaching, and we'll stop there for a second. So one of my students, I was talking about this last week in school, because obviously with the elections, to me this is kind of a fun topic to speak about, to see, where do we hold about all this, at least in our system. And so one of my students asked me, what happens if you have three rabbis on a Beis Din, and two of them know the answer, but they argue with what the answer should be? Let's say you have two litigants come to a Beis Din. Okay, you've got two litigants coming to a Beis Din. One of them says one of the judges goes with the plaintiff. The other judge goes with the defendant. And the third judge says, "I don't know." Okay, so that's a great question, and I didn't know the answer to that question. So I called Rabbi Yisraeli, who is a posek and who does sit on the Beis Din, both the Sephardic Beis Din as well as the RCC when he's needed. He fills in for Rabbi Sauer, Rabbi Bess. And I asked him, what does Beis Din do? And he says, there's a whole system of adding judges, which I didn't know about because it's one of these practical sorts of things, where they actually bring in other rabbis. But you always have to bring in two more, or whatever, you bring in the right amount, so you end up with an odd amount. And there's some sort of a protocol. I don't know what it is, but it's a fascinating. It was a simple question with an almost an obvious sort of answer. Okay, thank you, Myrna. Yes, Rabbi Baruch Epstein. By the way, Rabbi Baruch Epstein, who wrote Torah Tamima, what did he do for a living? He was a banker, if I'm not mistaken. He was a businessman, a banker. I forget which exactly. He was not a rabbi, quote unquote. He was not an official rabbi, but obviously.
He was a Levium.
Huh?
He was a Levium.
He was a what?
He was a Levi.
Okay, but what did he do for a living?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember.
Oh, yeah. So I believe he was a banker, or he was a businessman. He was not a Rosh Hashiva or anything like that. But his Svarim gained tremendous popularity. Okay. let's take a look at one more piece here, and then we'll continue probably next week. Showing you the wrong one. Hold on. Here we go. So this is the first Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Dine Mamonis Bishlosha. Cases concerning monetary law are adjudicated by 3 judges. Gzelos v'chavalos, cases concerning robbery, personal injury. Also, Bishlosha, 3 judges. Nezek, Chatzi Nezek, Tashlum Kefel. These are various fines, which we don't actually administer nowadays anymore. Are also, you have 3 judges. Okay. The Mishnah there continues about other kinds of cases which require more judges than 3. The Shulchan Aruch writes, can you give me a charger? Thanks. Shulchan Aruch writes, Ein beis din pachas mishlosha. Computer. There's no beis din less than 3. The chol shlosha nikrayim beis din afilo hediotos. And every beis din, every 3 people are called beis din, even hediotos. Hediotos basically means people that are not necessarily the biggest experts. Okay. Then he goes into whether they have a right or the power to judge somebody if they're not interested in being judged. There's all kinds of laws that go into Beis Din. We all know that in the rabbi's contract it says that there's a dispute between the rabbi and the board. So I believe that it's supposed to be arbitrated by the RCC or something like that, right?
I think the president decides.
How many months do you have left? How many months do you have left?
Too many.
It's like you're almost there, right?
No.
You're halfway.
High holidays.
Tishrei Cheshvan, we're almost done. Well, you're almost 2 months in. Okay. All right.
But does this all mean democracy? These numbers?
No.
Democracy?
What do you mean by democracy?
Well, that's what we asked at the beginning of the issue.
Right. So my point is
that what defines democracy?
Well, my point here, Jerry, is that the you see from the Mishnah, and again we'll talk about more in depth next week because there's a lot more here. But you see from the Mishnah that the Beis Din, the fact that a Beis Din has to have 3 people is because they're allowing for disagreements. So you have 2 versus 1, and that's what I mean when I talk about democracy. Really, I'm talking about majority. Greg?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
And you gave the case where there's 3, but 1 can't make up his mind. One can't. What if there are 2 that can't make up their minds? Now there is a majority. It's 1-0.
That's very interesting. So that's a great segue. Okay, let's take a look. We have a Mefarish over here called the Sma, the Iras Yinayim, say from Iras Yinayim on the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, there's 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch. And each section of Shulchan Aruch has 2 primary commentaries. They've all got hundreds of commentaries. But 2 primary commentaries that are published and printed on the sides. You know how a Gemara has Rashi and Tosfos? Shulchan Aruch has for Choshei Mishpah, which is the laws of financial matters, business matters, which includes the laws of courts and witnesses. So you have on one side you have the Sma, the Sefer Mi'iras Yinayim, and on the other side you have the Urim V'Tumim, I think. Okay, but again, the names don't matter. But check this out. If I were to tell you that the concept of a Beis Din having 3 people is a Torah concept. I mean, it's a Jewish concept, okay? Meaning because you have to have a majority. Would you? And then I asked you a follow-up question, which is simply very similar to Greg's question, which is, do you actually have to have 3 people? Maybe 1 person is enough. Because if the reason why you want to have 3 is because you're concerned for a majority, well, then 1 is also a majority. So the notion of 1 versus 3, that kind of a discussion, where does that come from? So the Mishnah doesn't talk about it. Maybe the Gemara does, but the Mishnah itself doesn't talk about it. Shulchan Aruch doesn't say anything. It just gives you the bottom line that you have to have 3. But in the commentary, the Sefer Mi'iras Yinayim writes, Ein beis din pachas mishlosha. That concept of a beis din having 3 people, hainu as a minimum, hainu midivrei sofrim. That's rabbinic. Aval midin Torah. However, when it comes to the law of the Torah itself, b'dinim mamanos bechad sagi. When it comes to a financial matter, one person is considered to be a bezin. Now, because of a Rambam, and then he quotes a Rambam. Okay, and other Sfarim as well. So, which is really interesting that potentially, at least on a Torah level, one person might be considered a majority, would be considered a majority according to some opinions. And the reason why you would have three is in order possibly to avoid, I'm going to make up a reason, and we can all come up with reasons why it's better to have three than one, because maybe the guy was inclined, even though they're not supposed to be inclined to one way or another, and they're not supposed to be subjective, but, when you have three, it's less likely to be corrupt.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my head around this. It seems to me that there's a difference between making of the law and adjudicating the law. Mm-hmm. And what we seem to be talking about is adjudicating the law, and making the law in Halacha. There's no democracy. It comes from Hashem.
Okay.
It's handed down by Moshe, and it is not interpreted, but it is illuminated by the Mishnah and by the Gemara, etc., etc.
Okay.
So
Jerry, you're asking a phenomenal question, and you're basically telling me, Rabbi, you're conflating two issues. And why are you mixing the two? Maybe there's two different systems. And the answer is you're right, and I'm glad you picked up on that. And I'm aware that I'm conflating the two. But the reason I'm conflating the two is because it's not me that's conflating it as much as the source for the notion that when it comes to adjudicating the law, you go with the majority, is the same source for the notion that when it comes to machlokes, as to what the halacha is,
yeah.
Which again, you're right, Moshe Rabbeinu only gave one halacha, but as machlokes developed, Hashem himself gave us a framework and a structure to which includes the same pasuk that directs us to to go with the majority opinion. So if you have, let's say, in halachic terminology, you have major people, Rambam, Rabbeinu Yerucham, the Rosh, just to name a few. So let's say those three are all in agreement, and you have, let's say, the Ramban argues on them. So then the Shulchan Aruch is going to go with those three people, because you have three major people against one relatively minor person compared to them, right? And the halacha is going to be it's not adjudicated, but the halacha is going to be determined that we should go with the opinion of the three, not the opinion of the one, because they are number one. It happens to be those names are more prominent in deciding halacha, but number two, and more importantly, perhaps, is because they're the majority. So you're correct. I am conflating it. The reason I'm conflating it is because the two are actually learned from the same pasuk of Achei Rabim Lahatos. But just coming back to my point over here, the Sma held that the idea of a Beis Din, minimum Beis Din being three people is midivrei sofrim. However, the Shach holds the Kevalan the Kaimal and the Shanaim Shadanu Ein Dinei Din. Since the halacha is if two judges were to sit in a court and the third guy didn't show up, and they went ahead with the court cases for the day anyways, so we tell them you wasted your time and your judgment doesn't count. So since that's true, therefore he says it's actually min haTorah that three people are required. All I want to try to bring out of this, and there's a major discussion about what the opinion of the Rambam is, okay? And that's, and I have not prepared that yet. That's on a whole other level. Major commentaries, very lengthy commentaries discussing what is the Rambam's opinion about this question. Is one judge considered to be enough min haTorah, or are three judges considered to be min haTorah? And that, but again, my point to show you is that we do have a machlokas between the Sma and the Shach as to whether the minimum number of judges is actually one or three. I want to leave it here for tonight, but there is a continuation of the shir. There definitely is a continuation of the shir, which deals with the concept of a yachid v'rabim halacha karabim, which is what Jerry was asking about, which is if you have one opinion says one way and many people say another way, so that we go with the many. The most famous story is the Tanur of Achinoi, is the story of Rabbi Eliezer, where he creates all these miracles to prove that he's right. And the Chachamim say, "Your miracle is shmiracle. You're the single opinion. We're the majority, and therefore we go with the majority." If you're probably familiar with that story, probably heard it at some point. So we'll study that next week, and we'll look at it next week. There's a lot more here, but I thought this would be interesting because obviously it's nothing really to do with democracy. Okay, it has much more to do with if there is a majority. Is a majority stronger than a minority? Obviously, in a secondary question, is a majority in a later generation versus a minority of an earlier generation. Okay, that's a next level question. All right, Mr. Smith, can I trouble you to stay on for a minute after everyone leaves, just for a quick powwow? I thank everybody for joining tonight. Yasher koach,
Thank you, Rabbi.
and I wish you all Shavua Tov.